Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, December 4th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at Sidney Powell and her Republican colleagues that are now asking people to not vote in the 2020 Georgia Senate runoff, 2021 actually. So the Georgia Senate races are up for grabs. That would overall determine the party balance of power. If the Republican Party wins any of the two Georgia runoff elections, they remain in control. The Democratic Party needs both of them in order to win back control of the United States Senate. The future of the Biden administration and the Democratic Party and their ideals really hinges on two Senate races in the state that voted for Joe Biden on the presidential level, but also for Republicans in years prior and also in this election. Overall, this is not going to benefit President Trump. Sidney Powell, I'm sure many of you guys know her name. She was a part of the Trump legal team. She was recently ousted, as recently as November 22nd, because of her far-fetched conspiracy theories. It says right here, far-fetched and unsupported claims. They were absolutely unsupported. And while President Trump perpetuates this notion that the election is not over, that the election still has to go through some sort of process, meaning that he declaring himself the winner, that he is the actual winner, she goes even further than that. And it was enough so that the Trump campaign had to completely cut her off from the legal team because she was discrediting it. But that received backlash from members of the right, members of the Trump campaign. Now, many Republicans around the country didn't like Sidney Powell. They thought she was bringing down President Trump, and arguably she was. She was bringing down the institution of our American elections and just overall bringing this idea that the election was even more so rigged than President Trump would want to push on. But Sidney Powell, cut from the Trump team, actually recently held a Stop the Steal rally in Georgia on Wednesday, December 2nd. This Stop the Steal rally was a rally pretty much just to fire up these supporters, to encourage them to push their congressional members, their senators, their representatives, to call for some type of election recount or some audit of the votes, and asking Brian Kemp and a number of other Republicans statewide to not certify the results. Georgia already certified. Georgia certified before this rally. But the main focus of this rally was not that, against Joe Biden or against Raphael Warnock or against Jon Ossoff, but rather against the Republican Party that doesn't call on their colleagues to recount the election or to audit the election. And at this election, they essentially said, Sidney Powell and, other members, Lynn Wood, said, do not vote in these runoff elections. Do not vote in these runoff elections. So they're not speaking to Democrats. They're not speaking to independents. They are speaking to the subsection of the Republican Party, the 60 to 65% that does not believe that the election was legitimate. And they're asking them not to vote in the runoff election, citing that if this election, 2020, was rigged, why would this election not be rigged? And they also bring up the argument that if Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue do not force Brian Kemp, the governor, and Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, both Republicans, to hold a new election or to recount the votes, or pretty much just pushing them to not allow these electors to vote for Joe Biden on December 14th. They are asking these senators, and they are saying, if these senators don't do this, if they don't deliver for us, we will not deliver for them. And you're starting to see that come as a sort of idea among some of these more prominent Trump supporters that they aren't voting in the runoff elections. A lot of them are loyal to President Trump and President Trump alone. Donald Trump has recently thrown Brian Kemp under the bus, saying that he wasn't a good governor, saying he wasn't being fair about the election, saying he regrets his endorsement back in 2018. Right here, they have not earned your vote. Think about how that messaging plays amongst voters who are loyal to President Trump and him alone, who back President Trump at every single thing. If he tells them to vote, they will vote. But when you see people that were members of the Trump legal team, members that were very close to President Trump, telling you that if these senators did not deliver for President Trump, and President Trump also has no incentive to actually push these runoff elections even further because he is on his way out. He is not going to be working under this Senate. And while he, yes, would like to spite Joe Biden, these Republican senators, while maybe saying, count every vote and also make sure that there wasn't any fraud, they aren't taking as harsh of a stance as some of these Republican members would like them to. And it's sort of as if the Republican Party in Georgia is imploding. They're arguing. There's a lot of infighting about whether or not the election was rigged or not. Brian Kemp, Brad Raffensperger, two elected Republicans on the statewide level, saying that the election was fine. The results are certified. this is okay. And then you have the Trump wing of the Republican Party saying, absolutely not. We will not back your candidates if you do so. But I do think that we are somewhat overestimating. If whether or not that this will actually impact the outcome of the election. But I do want to take my attention to question number 11 here on the Survey USA poll, which was actually very accurate. If you watched my video yesterday, it was extremely accurate back in 2020. I know that seems like a while ago, but for the Georgia regular election. So this poll was fairly accurate. These pollsters are A-rated from 538. But they asked a question. Amongst those who are not likely to vote in the runoff, they asked them, why aren't you voting in the runoff election? Now, 19% said they aren't that interested. That's understandable. Some of these people only voted because they were voting in a presidential election. Typically, people don't vote in runoffs or special elections. We rarely ever see higher turnout. In terms of people that don't have time, 7% don't believe their vote matters. That hurts. 17%. That is a very significant amount. And if these Trump surrogates or former Trump surrogates, it doesn't matter. As long as they're closely tied. President Trump praised Sidney Powell very recently. They are telling these Republicans and some independents who may have been right-leaning that their vote will not matter, that the vote is rigged. They may not vote. 15% say they don't like the candidates. That's standard with every type of election. 13% say the voting process is rigged. 13% is saying the voting process is rigged. That's not Democrats. That's the Republican Party. That is Trump loyalists. And, when we see a lot of these people, and you're talking about a lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump, many of them were voting for Donald Trump. You cannot say the same for Joe Biden. The majority of people were not voting for Joe Biden. It was about even. It was about more against President Trump and more for Joe Biden as a candidate. But Donald Trump really inspired something in his base, and around 85% of his supporters were voting for him, not necessarily against Joe Biden. But looking at that, 13% believe the voting process is rigged. If this impacts the Republican Party, will that messaging that the election was rigged actually help them? Had Donald Trump immediately conceded the election and not brought up this idea of voter fraud, that 13% would likely not be there at all. And chances are these are Republican voters. The Democratic Party has been constantly saying the election is secure this election. The Republican Party, I guess more so Donald Trump, has been saying it's not. And that 13%, in a state that was decided by less than 1%, could make all the difference. It was a 0.25% margin of victory for Joe Biden in Georgia. It was extremely, extremely narrow. And these two Senate races, if they go blue, the Republican Party is going to be asking, was that messaging worth it? Was it worth it for President Trump to feel more comfortable about the election results for the next few months? Because once the electors vote, it's a done deal. Once Congress certifies it, it's a done deal. It doesn't matter if there's Republicans in the Senate. It's going to get certified, and Joe Biden is going to be inaugurated on January 20th. There are countless Republicans now that have congratulated President-elect Biden. They are saying he won the election. And as that list continues, it's only going to hurt Donald Trump. But the fact that 13% say that the voting process is rigged is not helpful at all. And then an additional 5% say they are intentionally boycotting the runoff. That may not seem like a lot. But again, this election in Georgia was decided by 12,000 votes. So yes, that matters. And yes, that could make a difference. These Democrats are not saying they are going to boycott the election. These Democrats are not saying that the election is rigged. They are saying, they're going to vote. And if the Democratic Party can do anything similar to what they did on the presidential level, they will win both Senate seats. But as you can see in this data, right now, Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff are doing very well. They are doing very well. And one other thing that I want to point out is approval rating. Not necessarily approval rating of Donald Trump, but more so approval rating of Brian Kemp as governor and Brad Raffensperger as Secretary of State. Two Republicans vilified by the president, both of which approved of. A pretty significant amount approving of them. Raffensperger fares a little bit better. But overall, Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State, has a 44% approval rating. That's not too shabby for someone who is attacked constantly by President Trump and his surrogates. For Brian Kemp, however, it's a little bit more difficult for him. He has a 46% disapproval rating and a 44% or 45% approval rating. So it's a little bit tricky for him. It's not going to be 43%. It's not going to be the easiest thing for him to try to turn this around into something positive as he enters into 2022, just because he's lost a significant portion of the Republican base. But the fact that still over 40% of these Georgia voters approve of Brian Kemp as governor, it may not make it easy for that 43% to see the president of the United States constantly attacking him just for certifying the election results or acknowledging that Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. And if you look down here, amongst those who believe Joe Biden won the election, 57% said he won fair and square. 57%. 32% say Trump won votes. Trump won. And that votes were lost and changed. And that's something that's going to hurt Donald Trump in the long run. That's something that's going to hurt Republicans in the long run, because as people lose confidence, and as we can see traditionally amongst the right wing, they probably aren't going to be inclined to vote. They are going to listen to Sidney Powell, and they're going to hear they didn't deliver for us, meaning Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. They didn't deliver a Trump presidency. Why should we deliver for them on January 5th? I don't think that's the mindset of 90 to 95% of these Republican voters, but that's still going to be in the back of the heads of some of these voters who may not even vote. Some of these voters that voted for Trump that aren't returning to the polls because of that 18% block that's either boycotting it or believes that the election will not be secure. That is 90% Republicans, at least. Because President Trump and the Republican Party is the only party that is perpetuating this notion that the election was not secure. And sometimes that works in your benefit, but this time it's showing that it won't. And Georgia has shown us that there are extremely close races across the state. Extremely close races. Very, very close. And right now, looking at both Georgia Senate seats, if the Democrats are able to capitalize on this, if they are able to expand off of this, Sidney Powell rhetoric and Lin Wood rhetoric that Republicans that supported Trump should not vote in a rigged election, asking them, what have they done to earn your vote? With less than a month to go, actually a little bit over a month to go, the Democratic Party is probably going to be very happy with a lot of this messaging. Because up until Inauguration Day, we are going to see this. Up until, Joe Biden is put into the White House, we are going to see this. And fortunately for the Democratic Party, the runoff election is 15 days before the inauguration. Just reading this article, we see the lock him up chance. We're targeted at Brian Kemp, the governor. That's going to be difficult for him entering into 2022. Let's see. Lin Wood initiated the chance, calling for a protest out of Kemp's house and his resignation because he hasn't moved to overturn President-elect Joe Biden's win in the state. That's significant. He says that I would encourage all Georgians to make it known that you will not vote at all unless your vote is secure. And essentially, that's Sidney Powell. Essentially, she's saying that if the election isn't overturned in Georgia, then your vote won't be secure because they believe that the election was stolen. And if that isn't changed, then don't vote. All in all, it's going to be very difficult for the Republican Party to try to take this messaging and make it something positive. Sidney Powell, Lin Wood, Sidney Powell especially, being praised by Trump very recently, only ousted 2 weeks ago. She has a very memorable name. She has she has a name that's been in the news media for quite some time now. And Trump Republicans that are fully loyal to President Trump may not be too inclined to vote for David Perdue or Kelly Loeffler. They're not going to vote for Democrats. They're just not going to vote entirely. And I feel as if at this point, it's going to be very difficult to try to spin this messaging, at least for the Republican Party's sake, to try to win back a lot of these voters who believe that the voting system is inherently flawed. And that messaging that President Trump has been putting up for the past month, over a month now, a month and a day, that the election is rigged, that the election in Georgia was unfair, that it wasn't, he was supposed to win the state. If that state is not overturned, which it absolutely won't be, which also just means a lose-lose situation for the Republican Party. If the electors vote for Joe Biden, which they will, it's going to be a very troubling time for the Republican Party in that state because there's a lot of infighting and they need to do a lot of damage control. But as these Trump surrogates, or former Trump surrogates, and as these Stop the Steal speakers start to encourage Trump Republicans to not vote in the runoff elections, it's going to be very difficult for us to see how they can match Democratic turnout. I still do think that the Republican Party does have the narrow favorite in these states, but it's knocking down day by day as we see some of these new rallies, some of this new data, and overall registration data as well, absentee ballot data. It's just going to be a very troubling time for the Republican Party if they're not able to contain this do not vote because it's rigged idea. Because at the end of the day, that only hurts them. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my post 2020 presidential election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.